Hello, and welcome to the School of International Service at American University. Today we are hosting a conversation with Ambassador, His Excellency Varuzhan Nersesyan, the Ambassador of Armenia to the United States. And this is part of a broad series of conversations that we have at the School of International Services with ambassadors, our neighbors here in Washington, D.C. But there's particular interest in Ambassador Nersesyan, and in part because at the School of International Service, we have many students who are from the region, but also a great deal of interest in the politics of Eurasia. My name is Keith Darden. I'm a professor at the School of International Service who works on nationalism, state building, and particular nationalism and state building in Eurasia. Today's conversation will last about 45 minutes. We'll save 15 minutes at the end for question and answers. If you'd like to ask a question, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is a Q&A option. But please keep in mind that this is for questions to be posted. It's not a running chat, and the public will not see it. So please do focus your comments there on questions that you hope that we can ask the ambassador when time remains at the end. We ask that no one record this session. We will be recording it and posting it on the SIS YouTube channel for those who'd like to watch it again, or for anyone who may have missed the event. So I'd like to introduce His Excellency Varuzhan Nersesyan, Ambassador from the Republic of Armenia to the United States. Ambassador Nersesyan has a rich educational and professional experience. He had a MA from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy in Boston, Massachusetts, an MA in Public Administration from the Public Administration Academy of the Republic of Armenia in Yerevan, and an MA in International Relations, Diplomacy, and International Law from Yerevan State University in Yerevan. He has a rich experience in the diplomatic relations of Armenia. He was appointed ambassador to the United States in November 2018. Prior to that, he served as the assistant to the president of the Republic of Armenia from January 2012 to April 2018. And he was responsible for international affairs and all matters related to the National Security Council. Prior to that, he was here in Washington from April 2008 to December 2012. He was the DCM, the Deputy Chief of Mission at the Embassy in Washington. And he's had a long history of experience working with the United Nations, the OSCE, and in the Armenian Foreign Ministry. So with that, I'd like to welcome the ambassador to our discussion today. I will say that because of the recent war, this has been sometimes a sensitive topic to discuss. In other words, the wounds have not healed from the recent conflict. And I know for myself that I have many students who were directly affected by the recent conflict, who lost family members and who have been displaced. And so in keeping with the interests of the university and having open and challenging discussions about topics that may be somewhat controversial, we will possibly challenge the ambassador on some issues, but it will always be done with a mind to respect the concerns and of the broader community. All right, Ambassador, welcome.
I am checking with the ambassador. He is starting his video shortly. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, let me just open with a question, since I think he probably will be able to hear us. In many ways, this conflict predates the Soviet Union, but the modern manifestation of the conflict over Karabakh really goes back to February of 1988, when the Karabakh Supreme Soviet, which was an autonomous part of the Azerbaijani Soviet Socialist Republic in the Soviet Union, voted to join Armenia. Since that time, we've had periods of war. The boundaries have changed, de facto, if not legally. And most recently, there was a major battle, a major series of wars in which Azerbaijan reclaimed a good bit of the territory that it had lost in the early 1990s. In fact, almost all the areas surrounding Karabakh, returning Armenia to the borders that it had in 1991 when it became independent from the Soviet Union. So after more than a quarter century of negotiations designed to address the status of Karabakh and to address the border conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, Ambassador, what in your mind has changed in the last 6 months, let's say, or in the last year that led to such an escalation of fighting when previously the conflict had been managed in the OSCE and the Minsk group, and there had been a concerted effort to resolve this conflict peacefully?
And I thank you, Professor Darden and your team, and I thank you for the invitation to speak to the class of the School of International Service at the American University. I'm happy to talk to you and to bring Armenia's perspective to you and to your class and to all those who are going to watch this program online. And thank you for inviting to talk about this acute topic of the recent war in Nagorno-Karabakh, more exactly of the recent aggression by Azerbaijan and Turkey against the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. But as you rightly mentioned, the roots of this conflict goes back. Perhaps I'll briefly, touch upon the background of this conflict in 1980s. In 1988, during the glasnost or perestroika period of the Soviet Union, when the opportunity was given to speak out and to express the opinion for the people. But basically, the root cause of this conflict, and when we discuss the current situation, the current war, and what has changed, that changed the status quo and brought to the current disastrous war, we need to address the root cause. The root cause of this conflict is a historical injustice that has been done towards the people of Nagorno-Karabakh in early 1920s, when during the first year of the Soviet Union, as a result of certain under-table, under-carpet deals between the Soviets and Kemalist Turkey, and as a result of an illegal decision of the Soviet Communist Party, Nagorno-Karabakh was forcefully subjugated to Soviet Azerbaijan without the consent of its people. For your information, the 90% of the population of the time was Armenian, including the majority of the city at this stake of the city of Shushi that Azerbaijan claims so unjustly. The majority of Nagorno-Karabakh at the time, 90%, was Armenian. But the demography was changed gradually during the time of the Soviet Union, and the Armenian population was forced to leave. There was an orchestrated policy conducted against the Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh. And while Azerbaijan succeeded a similar policy in Nakhichevan, which is another territory right now between Armenia and Iran and Turkey, as a part of Azerbaijan. While Azerbaijan succeeded in Nakhichevan during the Soviets, Azerbaijan did not succeed to fully depopulate Nagorno-Karabakh from Armenians, although the policy of ethnic cleansing was systematically conducted. So this brought why the conflict erupted in 1988. Originally it was not a conflict. Originally it was a simply peaceful plea for the people of Nagorno-Karabakh applying to the Soviet central government to give them a right to express their right to self-determination, which was also enshrined in the Soviet constitution, by the way. So as a response of this, the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, what they saw, and this was recently also reflected in one of the speeches of related to the conflict, when Russian president was talking about this origins of the conflict. What brought to the violent stage of the conflict was basically the events, the massacres and anti-Armenian pogroms that took place in Sumgait and later in 1990 in Baku. This was what brought, and the attacks against the Armenian population in Nagorno-Karabakh, the notorious Operation Koltso that was conducted together with the Soviet army of depopulating the surrounding Armenian, territories of Nagorno-Karabakh when, the The region of Shahumyan was lost. More than 20,000 Armenians out-migrated from there. The region of Getashenet, etc. And this brought to a large-scale war in 1990s. So while in the original phases of the war, Azerbaijan succeeded and advanced from all directions, when we, and they were almost at the brink of the capital city of Stepanakert. And Shushi was used to bombard Nagorno-Karabakh. The capital city of Stepanakert, not only Shushi, but the city of Aghdam and many others that is currently quite often used in Azerbaijani propaganda vernacular. These territories were all used to conduct a systematic aggression against the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. So as a result of a successful counteroffensive, and of course, Armenia does not hide that Armenia supports and is a security guarantor of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. A land corridor was managed to open. Nagorno-Karabakh was in 100% blockade, besieged and surrounded by Azeri forces, and at the brink of extermination, because all Azerbaijan wanted at the time was an extermination of the people, to get rid of these people. So when the modern day Azerbaijani leadership, quote unquote, generously says that, well, Azerbaijan is a multi-ethnic, tolerant country, etc., etc., I don't know to who it applies, but definitely it does not apply towards the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, because all they have seen.
If I could push back just a little bit on that.
Please,
the Caucasus, peoples were dispersed throughout the Caucasus. There were large Armenian populations in Tbilisi, right, in Georgia.
My father is originally from Tiflis.
Yes, it was a vibrant Armenian community. There were vibrant Armenian urban communities throughout the Caucasus. And part of what the Soviet Union had to deal with was creating, administrative units that were nominally, ethnic sort of nation states that ultimately didn't mean much because everybody was subject to Soviet power, and that these were all interior boundaries of the Soviet Union, and everybody was subject to the Communist Party, and so it didn't matter that much, in a sense, whether Karabakh was part of the Azerbaijani Soviet Socialist Republic or the Armenian Soviet Socialist Republic. It meant something about, transport lines and some sort of, state planning and administrative things, but it wasn't really, because these were never intended to be independent governments or independent nation states in the minds of the Soviets. They didn't worry about it too much. And so I think you're right in the sense that once the Soviet Union starts to break up, and once people start using the language of self-determination and nationalism to claim sovereign rights, that really opened a Pandora's box in the Caucasus, and it became very difficult to manage. And so it's true that the Armenian population of Karabakh, which was the majority, expressed a wish to join with Armenia, right, as this sorting process was taking place. But it's not clear that Azerbaijan was opposed to this because they wanted to ethnically cleanse the Armenians. They just didn't want to lose a province of their republic. They didn't want to lose any territory. And the war happens in part because of this conflict between the principle of maintaining these Soviet-era borders, right, which were internal borders of the Soviet Union, which become international borders, and the principle of self-determination. And we see this happening in Kosovo. We see it happening in a variety of different contexts where communist governments didn't manage their internal boundaries in a way that was designed to create long-lasting, stable rule. But at the same time, you don't want to have ethnic cleansing. You don't want to have the outcomes that we had in the former Yugoslavia and that we have had to some extent in the South Caucasus. And so there was an effort to maintain the legal right of Azerbaijan to its original Soviet republic boundaries, while trying to manage this conflict peacefully. And that was the basis of the Minsk Group. Right. This was the basis of, the efforts that lasted for nearly 30 years. So the question is, why does that break down now? Right? What is it that returns us to the use of force to try to resolve this conflict, when that has been a very difficult problem for all sides, but one which a diplomatic problem rather than a military tactical problem.
Of course. So the war of 91-94 ended up by a victory of the Nagorno-Karabakh Defense Forces. And other 7 regions around Nagorno-Karabakh were taken off, the control over them. But this was basically made clear both by Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh that we did not have claims over these territories. These territories were supposed to be originally as a security buffer zone around Nagorno-Karabakh, because as I said, they were attacking systematically Nagorno-Karabakh from those territories. So again, as goes to the borders, those borders were drawn illegally, as I said, in 1990s, never before. And at the time, Azerbaijan applied to the League of Nations and it was declined its claims towards Nagorno-Karabakh and Nakhichevan. So therefore, when they entered the Soviets and then the Soviet Union broke up, those borders were no longer legal borders of Azerbaijan because they were drawn upon the biased decision of the Communist Party, specifically by Joseph Stalin. Now, I'll come to the modern stage and I'll go to the, I know you want to hear my response to the question of what has changed. What has changed? From 1994, there have been negotiations under the auspices of OSCE Minsk Group, and several models of resolution have been proposed. This has been, by the way, a very difficult and painful issue in both countries, and Nagorno-Karabakh for the power struggle between the different, opposition and governments throughout these 25 years. So various models of resolution have been proposed. But if you follow the line between these negotiations, you will see that consistently under the auspices of OSCE Minsk Group, the notion of self-determination has matured towards Madrid principles, has been enshrined as a legally binding will of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, and the notion of return of territories has been also reflected. Similarly, the notion of the corridor between Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, the security guarantees, the return of refugees, all of these questions have been enshrined in the documents proposed by the co-chairs. So it was assumed, and I myself was a participant, what was now known as Prague process, as a part of Armenian negotiating team. So the basic notion that we were discussing at the time was to give Nagorno-Karabakh, and this was by the consent of Azerbaijan, to give Nagorno-Karabakh a right to referendum, to express its right to self-determination through a referendum, which was basically designed to be a face-saving for Azerbaijan, which was getting its territories back. So in this entire construction of the peace deal, Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh were getting self-determination to Nagorno-Karabakh, full self-determination without prejudice, by the way. And Azerbaijan was getting back its territories surrounding Nagorno-Karabakh. And there was going to be a genuine peace effort under the guarantee of the co-chairs, Russian Federation, United States, France, UN Security Council, so on and so forth. Now,
and a normalization of relations between Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Armenia as well, as I recall, that this was going to...
That was supposed to be a part, but later on, it emerged to a different process.
This also happened in 1997, sort of Leventer Petrosyan, as president of Armenia, also basically was on the verge of signing this agreement.
Yes, and that's
so we've been very close to this settlement for many, many decades.
There have been many occasions, Professor Darden. Leventer Petrosyan was negotiating that deal, and he came up with an article, peace or war before the resignation. Then Robert Kocharian was negotiating with Father Heydar Aliyev, and they came here to the United States all the way to Key West. And at the last, and that was almost a done deal, but the last minute when Azerbaijani president returned to Azerbaijan, supposedly under domestic pressure, he withdrew from originally agreed, clauses of that Key West deal. Later on, there were many other occasions. In Kazan in 2011, there was another instance when the third president of Armenia, agreed to the proposal brought by the co-chairs. And again, the last minute, Azerbaijani president brought a new pretext, 11 new proposals, right at the negotiations when you have at the table agreed document. He says, I have 11 new proposals. and the negotiations collapsed. So there have been many opportunities to resolve, and the victims, the thousands casualties on both sides, this lays on the conscience of Azerbaijani leadership who instigated this war. Now, what changed that it brought to this war? First of all, Azerbaijan used the advantage of its petrodollars. It seems that in the modern world, the petrodollars can buy everything. The caviar diplomacy, the notorious caviar diplomacy, can buy corrupt politicians in capitals, in different capitals, or experts in different think tanks around the globe. But basically, the petrodollars changed the nature of the warfare. Azerbaijan started an enormous, instigated enormous arms race in the region. They were bragging that their military budget several times surpassed Armenian entire state budget, and the arms control in the region created very dangerous situation. But before this war, what changed is the Turkish participation. During this war, Nagorno-Karabakh was not fighting against Azerbaijani army, just for the record to be straight. Nagorno-Karabakh was fighting with Azerbaijan, with Turkish military commandos and generals in Azerbaijani headquarters. It was not coincident that Azerbaijani chief of general staff was sacked, Sadikov, and jihadist military terrorists brought by Turkey. About 2,000 jihadists, 2,500 jihadist military terrorists were brought there. But more importantly, the equipment.
But let's say that we can talk about the Syrian mercenaries.
All I wanted to say, when you say the outcome of the war, you have to understand what was the immense nature of the force Nagorno-Karabakh army was facing. It was unprecedented war. For 44 days, that tiny little Armenian enclave was fighting against enormous forces. This was an asymmetric warfare. This was not when Azerbaijani leadership says that Azerbaijani army gained the victory, it does not match the reality. It was the drones that destroyed the defense lines, not the armies were fighting against armies. I know this does not matter at this stage, but enormous amount of drones were brought by Turkey and by, Azerbaijan was purchasing from Israel originally, but Turkey, right before the war, sold to Azerbaijan enormous amount of deadly drones.
Yes.
And Turkey.
All that is to say that Azerbaijan invested a great deal in its military. And
Turkey was a full participant.
Turkish advisors, as well as Turkish UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, drones. And it's true, there were some Syrian mercenaries who were brought in, also presumably with Turkish assistance from Syria, right? But Armenia was presumably aware of all of this, right? It's not like you're lacking in intelligence capabilities, right? You were aware of what was going on in the lead up to this conflict. And so why, it seemed like Armenia's position actually hardened on Karabakh in the lead up to this conflict. Pashinyan stated that Karabakh is Armenia. There was the conflict, the border conflict that took place in the summer prior to the war in September. And that was an Armenian-Azerbaijani border, not a border with the areas of Karabakh. And the Azerbaijanis were quite sensitive about that area because it's very close to their pipelines, which is obviously the lifeline of the regime. And so why, given the strength of Azerbaijan, even without Turkish backing, right? Given their immense resources, given the sort of strength of Azerbaijani diplomatic leverage, both in Washington with the Trump administration and in Moscow, why did Armenia not take this into account, right? You say that the thousands of deaths are of soldiers in these battles are the fault of Azerbaijan, but on some level, an awareness of the power disparity should have led Armenia to take a more conciliatory line and get closer to those earlier agreements where the territories around Karabakh were yielded back to Azerbaijani control. And it seems like the Russians were supporting that, right? So that the Russians were trying to get a settlement here, and the Russians did not come to Armenia's aid in this conflict, right? And so why did Armenia put itself out on a limb against a much more powerful adversary to lead to the result that we have. You can say it's not a victory for Azerbaijan because it was through drones, but they won through drones, but there was a victory, right? They've achieved the territorial gains that they hope to achieve for these past decades through negotiations.
Yes, Professor, thank you. Of course, I fully understand your point, but of course, Armenia was aware about the growing capabilities. As I said, we were watching Azerbaijan gradually increasing its military budget, purchasing deadly weapons, and trying to push, through various services and measures for aggressive diplomatic pressure, which, by the way, didn't work and didn't yield any tangible results for Azerbaijan. This entire campaigns in the forum shopping, trying to take the issue out of OSCE. Armenia was doing maximum to be flexible. Armenia has not, but there are red lines. How we could, under the pressure of Azerbaijani military might, give up the people of Nagorno-Karabakh and their right to say that, because all Azerbaijan was demanding at the negotiations, as contrary to the Madrid principles, to the very notion of the negotiations, to the very entire process of the letter and spirit of the peace process, Azerbaijan was saying, now no longer Nagorno-Karabakh. Originally, Azerbaijan would be in agreement that Nagorno-Karabakh was getting its right to self-determination. But after some point, Azerbaijan started to say, no longer this is going to be the case. I am now the mighty guy, and I want Nagorno-Karabakh to be, I'm granting it, broad autonomy. Well, we said, thank you for your generosity. The people of Nagorno-Karabakh have seen the results of this broad autonomy. So they did not want, the people of Nagorno-Karabakh did not want to be subjugated to Azerbaijan. So not only Azerbaijan claimed about this broader autonomy status, but they also started to expose territorial claims towards the Republic of Armenia itself. Even before this conflict, Azerbaijani leader is on record talking about territorial claims about the capital city of Yerevan, which is around 3,000 years old city, and about other parts of the Republic of Armenia. So
yes, so if I could ask about that, now that it's clear that Azerbaijan has superior military capability, and they do seem to be making claims on the territory of the Republic of Armenia, particularly in the south, what they call Zangezur, right? This channel between Nakhichevan and Azerbaijan proper that borders with Iran. What is the Armenian strategy for addressing those threats? Right? So if it is the case that the diplomatic process broke down because Azerbaijan no longer saw an interest in that diplomatic process because they could achieve their ends through force rather than through diplomacy, and that they were unsuccessful in achieving what they wanted through diplomacy, but effectively arming themselves was going to get the positive result. And they still have claims that have not been realized, territorial claims. How does Armenia propose to change the situation? Are they going to rely on the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization with Russia and some of the other former Soviet republics? Is there some hope that France or the United States will provide for their territorial integrity? Because what we've seen in the past several years is that Turkey has been very willing to use force outside of its borders to achieve territorial gains. And Azerbaijan has shown both a capability and a willingness to use force to achieve territorial gains. And Armenia is relatively small and weak in this context against those two powers. So what is the strategy moving forward, both diplomatically and militarily, for Armenia to preserve its security?
Thanks, Professor. Of course, Armenia is fully aware of the ongoing threats and challenges to our security, national security, to our borders. The things are still very much fragile in the aftermath of the November 9th statement. There are, of course, processes going on. There was a meeting in Moscow mediated by the Russian president. dedicated to the opening of the transport links and communications, which is essentially enshrined in the document of November 9th. But there are basically strong considerations about Azerbaijan and Turkey, which openly, by the way, in the aftermath of the war, during the so-called military parade in Baku, Azerbaijani president and Turkish president, one after another, confirmed those in their statements, those territorial claims towards the Republic of Armenia, which is completely illegal and unfounded. While the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh is a disputed territory, the territory of the Republic of Armenia is never a disputed territory. It is protected by the international law, by the Armenia's existing national security arrangement, first of all, within the CSTO and bilateral Armenian-Russian military strategic alliance. This territory, in case of possible attacks against the Republic of Armenia, is protected by existing security guarantees of the Republic of Armenia. Of course, Armenia is aware of this, and Armenia's foreign policy has been basically, since its independence, foreign and national security policy has been, of course, aimed towards diversifying its foreign policy, of having other layers of arrangements of within OSCE, within European security arrangements. But we need a more serious contribution by the international community. First of all, by the United States and France and European Union as major players in this region, to bring about a security and stability in the region. First of all, to talk about the security guarantors and the role of France and the United States. If the peace occurred under the Minsk Group co-chairmanship plan, by default, OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs were going to be, including Russia, United States, and France, were going to be the security guarantors of that peace agreement, which unfortunately never happened, and we ended up with a war. Also, the UN Security Council was supposed to be a security guarantor, the OSCE. There were multiple layers of security guarantors. We need to think about the political settlement. The issue, as contrary to the declarations of the Azerbaijani leadership, is not resolved. The issue is frozen. And as it's known, things can at some point get out of the deep freezing condition. So the issue, it's a delusional thinking. It's a self-deception to consider that the issue is resolved and the people of Nagorno-Karabakh are going to be citizens of Azerbaijan. It's not going to ever happen. The people of Nagorno-Karabakh, even though after this terrific war, after this devastating war, stand strong on their territory, and they want to live peacefully. They want to live peacefully to exercise their right to self-determination. So no matter how people try to, dig the issue under the ground and to pretend that the issue is being resolved, the issue is not being resolved. It's necessary to address. Before this issue is resolved, it's not going to be possible to talk about durable peace in the region, Professor Darden. We want to talk about stable, durable peace and dialogue among the nations, among the Armenian people and Azerbaijani people, among the Armenian people and Turkish people. But we cannot, we cannot avoid from the fundamental questions. So
the question is, how do you get stable peace? And that's obviously something that, at the School of International Service, a lot of people are quite interested in. My students are focused on that. And, one argument is that peace is going to take into account the relative disparities in power. And that partly why we had war in this instance was because the negotiating positions were out of sync with the relative power of the negotiating parties. And so that's one version. What you're suggesting is that peace will come when you have some notion of just arrangements. In other words, there's a sort of a legitimate outcome where people are ruled by the governments that they wish to be ruled by, and that the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, it will not be a peaceful settlement so long as the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh are inside Azerbaijan, right? Because that's not going to be a stable end outcome. So what do you think is a realistic let's try to combine these two. And what do you think is a realistic, stable endpoint for Armenia to aspire to, given the strength of Azerbaijan, while also taking into account the interests of the people of Karabakh? Do you think it's reasonable to pursue, say, an independent Artsakh Republic now under these circumstances? Is the joining of Karabakh with Armenia and the maintenance of the Lachin corridor as a kind of agreed upon international thoroughfare, is that a possibility? What do you envision is the negotiating position of Armenia that could lead to a peaceful settlement?
I think, first of all, we need to do everything, our utmost. The key stakeholders in this process, Armenia, Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijan, and the mediators, to maintain the integrity of the peace process, to return to peaceful resolution at some point. Right now, it is not mature to discuss all those issues at once. I fully understand. It is necessary for some time to heal the wounds of this war and to return to the negotiating table in good faith, to talk not about fait accompli, because some people may have temptation that fait accompli may change the situation. It is not going to change. We need to talk about open and sincere dialogue about how to resolve this issue. We cannot, under fait accompli, say the Nagorno-Karabakh issue is resolved. We need to go back and look at the papers, by the way, we have on the negotiating table, which is the ink has not yet dried up on them, and to try to revive anew these documents and to look at these basic principles to see under these new circumstances how we're going to adjust the new situation to return back to a normal, because I don't see any other way rather to bring the process under the auspices of the co-chairmanship, and for all three co-chairs be actively engaged in this peace process. And by the way, we have seen enough degree of good cooperation between Russia, United States, and France, particularly between also, it is one of the unique conflicts where Russian Federation and United States have a good experience of working together on irrespective of their differences on many other situations. So to maintain the integrity of because we have seen Azerbaijan and Turkey completely undermining the institution, the very institution of OSCE co-chairs. So if this is going to continue, there is not going to happen anything. If Azerbaijan and Turkey think that under these new circumstances that they have territorial gains, and they're going to take the advantage, things may change. So we better drive the process towards the political final settlement. That's why I'm saying the issue is not resolved. We have the institution, we have the documents on the table, we can revisit them and look in a good faith towards the final peaceful resolution, which will bring about, only after that we can talk about genuine peace. How we can talk, Professor, about genuine peace when, I just want to finish one phrase, when Azerbaijan, keeps Armenian prisoners of war as hostages, as in pawns, and does not return them, even though it is enshrined in the document of November 9th, unconditional return, exchange of prisoners of war on the basis of the principles of all to all. How there can be a genuine reconciliation in the region when Azerbaijan has not condemned publicly the enormous amount of the war crimes, human rights violations, and humiliation of Armenian military. We have seen in the history of warfare many wars, but I haven't seen any war when the army is humiliating the opposing army, is trying to, I don't know whether this is a result of a complex of inferiority or some other, psychological things, but the internet is flooded with the images, with disturbing images, how Azerbaijani military has treated Armenian POWs. There are, of course, unwritten rules, but this has surpassed the imagination, what they have done. So this needs a condemnation. This needs a certain attitude. There cannot be a
And Azerbaijan would say that the POWs that they're continuing to retain were of a different status because they were taken on what was, sort of after the agreement, after the settlement.
May I comment on that, Professor? I just can comment on that.
This is like post-conflict policing, essentially, for Azerbaijan, rather than...
It is not true, Professor. It is not true.
Let's not go into the details of the POW.
One correction, because Azerbaijan says that consistently, that these people, the Armenian prisoners of war, they label them as terrorists, they label them as criminals, which is a complete absurd. And everybody knows, that this is an absurd. The point is that 10 days after the war, Azerbaijan instigated yet another provocation to take certain other territories in Hadrut region of Nagorno-Karabakh, which is, by the way, is under occupation of Azerbaijan. And this Armenian military...
Okay, but I do want to pull us back out from the details, because Azerbaijan also has a case against Armenia and the European...
I'm ready to debate about this, but...
let's not debate about that. Let's not debate about that, because war is always an unpleasant process.
It is, Professor. And absolutely, I fully agree.
There were potentially war crimes here, but most wars have freelance actions by individual actors that are totally unacceptable.
But it's been documented.
They should be prosecuted by both sides. Absolutely.
Denied by Azerbaijan. Look, the BBC correspondent in his...
I'm sure this will go through the courts. What I want from you is a sense of, in many ways, Armenia suffered greatly as a result of its victories in war in the early 1990s, right? So it led to the blockade of Armenia from Turkey and Azerbaijan, which cut all of Armenia's heavy rail links with the rest of the Soviet Union and pretty much destroyed Armenia's heavy industry as a result. It forced Armenia into a situation where it had to engage in trade with Iran because the border through Georgia wasn't always reliable, and the two borders with Azerbaijan and Turkey were closed, which was not necessarily a great position to be in while the United States was trying to put sanctions and pressure on Iran. There are lots of things that were negative, essentially, about holding the territories that Armenia was previously holding. Now that those territories have been lost, it is possible for Armenia to normalize relations with Turkey and Azerbaijan. It is conceivable that that heavy rail link could be reestablished. So that in this case, the loss in war could bring other benefits to Armenia. And that Azerbaijan might be willing to make some of these concessions if there is an acknowledgement that the conditions have changed. But if Armenia continues to stick to this notion that we just need to go back to the way things were, prior to this conflict, that's very likely to be a dead end diplomatically. And Armenia will then not have the territories of Karabakh under its control and will not have normalized diplomatic relations. And that seems to me not in Armenia's national interest.
No, Professor, all I'm not saying we need to go back to the history or to go back to the pre-existing conditions of the war. All I'm saying, we need to find a genuine solution. It cannot, the fait accompli, of course, we suffered a lot as a result of this war. I represent a generation that has seen Armenia under the cold winters without electricity, without heating at home, and we survived. The Armenian people, this is a nation of survivors, and I'm sure we're going to survive this enormous challenge as well. I'm not saying we need to live forever in these conditions. Well, I'm saying there cannot be a dictated solution that two dictatorships wanted to, transfer their power and to force a forceful solution over a given people in Nagorno-Karabakh or over the Republic of Armenia. Of course, Armenia is in favor of normalization, reconciliation, but that takes to certain efforts. We cannot forget the pages of our history. And for instance, with Turkey, while Armenia, and it's not, by the way, these blockades have not been imposed by Armenia. These blockades have been imposed by Azerbaijan and Turkey unilaterally. So they should open those borders unconditionally, because if this peace is going to sustain, they cannot put consistently preconditions for one or another way. So on the issue of Armenian-Turkey relations, Of course, that's an existential issue, but Turkey not only does not reconcile itself with its past and recognize the Armenian genocide, but Turkey, as we saw during this war, continues to pose a real threat in this life. So we're not talking about historical, theoretical exercises. We're talking about modern life. So if Turkey does not want to change its policy towards modern Republic of Armenia, how, Professor, you imagine us just, forgetting about the past and saying, well, this is going to be bright future under these new circumstances as we're going to, do festival? It's not going to happen that easy. It's going to take very serious efforts unless Turkey takes a real effort towards real, genuine, recognition of its past and reconciling with its past. It's not going to be possible to overnight, even if the border is open, So we need to think about these things very seriously in all of the countries of the region. I understand you want to say that, well, there is a new reality. There is a, status quo, the new status quo. There are strong guys in the region. They have petrodollars, they have military might, this and that. As I said, of course, we are cognizant of those facts. Nevertheless, we are aware of our national history, of our national interest. While we are ready towards peace and dialogue, we are not ready to forget our history. We are not ready to give up our fundamental national rights, such as the people of Nagorno-Karabakh right to self-determination. These are fundamental notions that we need to find solution.
Okay, I'm gonna open this up to some questions from the audience because they've been very patient.
Yes.
One question is regarding the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Given the fact that Russia didn't support Armenia in this conflict, which was of course not covered under the CSTO because these were areas that were not part of the Republic of Armenia formally. Armenia never annexed these areas. It was never part of Armenia. But to what extent is Russia seen as a reliable partner after this? And I think there's a broader question here about Russia's relationship with Turkey and Russia's relationship with Azerbaijan, and the growth of those ties and the development of those ties over the last decade in particular. To some extent, Turkey may be as important a partner, even though it's a rival to Russia, as Armenia is. And that puts Armenia in a very vulnerable position since it relies on Russia and that alliance to provide for its security and defense. So any thoughts that you had? I don't know whether, this is this is sort of the question that one can't really ask an ambassador, but I'm going to ask you.
Thank you. By the way, my thesis at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy has been dedicated to the Russian-Turkish relations in the South Caucasus, historically and in the modern times.
Okay.
It's a very interesting topic during the student years in academia to study as well. But of course, Armenia is a member of Collective Security Treaty Organization, and Armenia has a military strategic partnership with Russian Federation. By the way, contrary to Azerbaijani, claims, Armenia has not asked the Collective Security Treaty Organization to extend help to Armenia. There has been certain discussions, but Armenia has not officially applied to the organization. As it has been explained by the leadership of Russian Federation in the case of the bilateral treaty obligations, and in the case of CSTO, both documents refer to the territory of the Republic of Armenia. Although there has been certain Azerbaijani attacks at certain, settlements of the Republic of Armenia, we did not invoke the treaty. We did not apply to CSTO for a military support. Armenia trusts its partners. Armenia, of course, relies on its the treaty obligations with CSTO and Russian Federation. But of course, as you mentioned, there is a growing dynamic in the region. We, of course, are cognizant and aware that, for instance, and we have expressed openly to our partners our serious considerations about the weapon sales from Russian Federation to Azerbaijan. This has been a matter of serious discussion between Armenia and Russian Federation, and to other partners in, by the way, in collective security treaty organizations. We have expressed serious concerns to other partners as well in Belarus, in other members of broader Commonwealth of Independent States. We are aware of the dynamic of Russian-Turkish relations, trade and economic relations, or in Syria of the joint military patrols and developments. But we basically view this as their own bilateral arrangement that should not affect Armenia's national security. Armenia has open dialogue, of course, with its partners, and we did discuss in our relations these matters very seriously. So while we're aware of this broader dynamic, we rely on those treaty obligations. And of course, as I said, when it comes, if it comes to the Republic of Armenia, those treaty obligations will be invoked if necessary.
Okay. And there is a confident feeling in Yerevan that Russia would honor those treaty obligations.
Of course, there is a confident feeling, and as I said, but first of all, Armenia has always relied on its own, first of all, forces and capabilities, as any state, as any other state. But of course, we rely on our existing treaty obligations with Russian Federation, with collective security organization. But as I said earlier, we view our participation in the broader, arrangements of European security, of Caucasus. Unfortunately, those arrangements does not work any longer, such as in the way it worked in the past. And this is another matter that needs to be revisited. Such arrangements as CFE treaty, conventional forces in treaty, or European, security, other measures that are under the OSCE confidence and security building measures. These arrangements need to be revisited and strengthened to be also visible in the South Caucasus, the role they can play, and to strengthen the security in the South Caucasus. So perhaps we need to talk about at this stage about the existing security arrangement, but we can talk about broader issues of, which
Yes.
was affected as a result of current crisis between East and West. So,
yeah. So I have actually a question also from the audience about the United States and the Biden administration. The Trump administration had a fairly accommodating relationship to Turkey. Sort of favoring Turkey and over the Kurds, for example, in Syria. And the Biden administration seems to be turning page on that and taking a much stronger position about the defense of democracy. Armenia is a democracy. Azerbaijan is not. Do you sense a shift in what might be the United States position going forward? And also, as an ambassador, does that worry you in the sense that if the United States' position towards Armenia's security and interests is so dependent on which party is in power, and in fact, the Armenian communities in the United States are mostly in Democratic districts at this point, Schiff's district and in Massachusetts, those were sort of the strongholds of the Armenian diaspora community. Are you worried that whatever progress is made under a Biden administration might be wiped away in a future Republican administration? And are there any efforts to shift U.S. policy towards this region, get the U.S. involved in this region in a constructive and more durable way, rather than the kind of indifference and inattention to Armenian interests that we may have seen over the recent years?
Thank you. Of course, Professor Darden, we're very much inspired when President Biden took the office in the White House. I was present at the inauguration. We in Armenia and Armenian American community have great, recollections about his role be it in the Senate, be it in the office of the Vice President, his leadership, his dedication to the cause of human rights and values. So in this sense, of course, we are very much hopeful with President Biden administration expecting more proactive engagement in all the regions, including in South Caucasus. We view basically the United States as an essential part of the South Caucasus, architecture, overall security architecture. And as a co-chair, we have been actively working with the United States. So first of all, we're hoping a more proactive engagement in the peace process, to use the U.S. weight to bring about peace. As you said rightly, first of all, it has to do with the role of Turkey to restrain existentially as a NATO member. Of course, we are aware of the United States-Turkey issues over Turkey to fundamentally restrain its role in the South Caucasus and to stop destabilize the region, to stop threaten Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, and to stop the weapon, sales to Azerbaijan. In regard to Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, of course, we're hoping that Section 907 of Freedom Support Act waiver will not be extended further, and this will bring more stability to the region. But the more important word you underlined in the terms of Armenian-American relations, this is about shared values. This relation is about shared values, as President Biden said it in his speech, and later U.S. Ambassador in Armenia, Ambassador Tracy, recently enshrined into her article, democracy is precious. In our relations, Armenia is clearly today is a leader in them, even after the war, even after this devastating impact of COVID and the war. Armenia is very strong about its conviction about democracy. Democracy doesn't have alternative, and Armenia is determined to continue its path towards democracy, towards fight against corruption, against rule of law, and modern democratic society. It is in this area where Armenia and the United States have, and we're expecting and hoping, a broader support to Armenia from President Biden administration, beginning from the increase of the volume of U.S. assistance to Armenia, provision of substantial aid package to Armenia to cope with these difficulties. And as you said rightly, of course, Armenian-American community is a very important bond connecting our two countries, and is an important bridge. Of course, we know that Armenian community is predominantly in those states that are traditionally considered as democratic. So I have no prejudice in the future who will take the office after the elections of 2014. Of course, Armenian-American community 2024. Armenian-American community is, although there are majority of them are in democratic state, but Armenian caucus is bipartisan in the and recently Congressman Valadao from California joined the caucus, Republican congressman. So it's they're working on bipartisan on the principles of bipartisanship. Armenian caucus on the Capitol Hill, which we admire their activities, their leadership, and their support for Armenia. So we're hoping that under different administration we will be able to work with any administration, which will be in the United States, but elected by the people of the United States. And then, of course, we're hopeful about Armenian-American relations. These are great relations. We're looking forward to strengthen. By the way, we elevated just 2 years ago the level of our intergovernmental dialogue towards strategic dialogue. And then 2 sessions of this strategic dialogue already took place. We discussed a broad range of issues, and we're looking forward under Biden administration to strengthen this dialogue, to broaden its scope, to discuss between partners all of these issues, and of course to work for the progress of the peace and democracy in our region. So as I said, this is a relationship based on shared values, and we're very much hopeful that under Biden administration we will do strong steps towards further strengthening this partnership.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Your Excellency. It was a very interesting and broad-ranging conversation. My hope is that our shared values of peace and prosperity, as well as democracy, can extend to the South Caucasus as a whole. And I wish you all good fortune and luck in your efforts to achieve that goal. So thank you very much for joining us. And again, this will be posted on the SIS YouTube channel for future viewing. And we look forward to future events on the South Caucasus and future visits from you yourself to campus once things open up again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. And I wanted to thank on our part, you and your team for putting this event together and doing it together, this event, this discussion. Thank you for your great knowledge of our region. I was really admiring throughout this discussion to what extent you know our region, the sensitivities, the nuances. And I'm looking forward to work with you. And we're hopeful that once the communication is open, we were traditionally receiving here at the Armenian Embassy groups of students. We will be able also to host at some point your group here at the Armenian Embassy and to share more about our culture, about Armenian perspectives and policies. And once again, thank you very much for this discussion and all the best to you and to your team.
Thank you.